Thanks for listening to the Farmers Weekly podcast. Do remember you can subscribe to Farmers Weekly magazine and get all the latest news, views and market prices by visiting fwi.co.uk.
Minister, it's reported this morning that we're going to see the first farming strike. How do you feel about being the food minister who took hot cross buns off the table at Easter?
Obviously, I understand the unhappiness that is out there, but equally, I'm very confident that we have resilient supply chains, and I would encourage people to engage in dialogue with us about the future.
As farmers stop supplying wheat to flour mills, MPs quiz Farm Minister Daniel Zeichner about the government's attitude to agriculture. Also in this episode, a renewed sense of purpose at the Agriculture and Horticulture Development Board. A year after his appointment, we get a progress report from AHDB Chief Executive Graham Wilkinson. And with the latest news for thousands of farmers on the Sustainable Farming Incentive.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
Welcome to the Farmers Weekly Podcast. I'm Johann.
I'm Louise Impey.
And I'm Hugh. Broom.
All that and more coming up. First, though, industry leaders have called on the government to clamp down on illegal meat imports. Failure to do so risks a devastating animal disease outbreak like foot and mouth or African swine fever, they say. Norfolk Farmer and National Pig Association Chairman Rob Mutimer.
At the moment, they are not taking this seriously enough. We are not inspecting what's coming in from our ports. This is not meat that's being traded legally across things. This is illegal meat that's coming in, and a lot of it now is being bought here by organised crime gangs. The virus we're talking about of African swine fever is phenomenal at surviving in the environment. It can survive in frozen meat, it survives in fresh meat, cured meats, and it even survives in soil for months and months on end. So once it's here, the chances of it spreading is quite high. The situation in Europe has changed phenomenally over the last 10 years, and we need to get our borders so we are secure, so we're not bringing this virus into the country. At the moment, if we find illegal meat, it's just confiscated and the criminals are allowed to carry on their merry way. There's absolutely no comeback to them. So they don't lose their vans, they don't pay a fine, they just lose the meat or the pallet of meat that we're talking about. And this is not a deterrent. We need a deterrent. Actively crushing some vehicles would be a great deterrent. Changing the law so there's a fine for people who are actually smuggling, which is what it is, bringing illegal meat into our country, is the next big step, because we must have a deterrent to stop the organised crime.
That's Norfolk farmer Rob Mutimer talking to Farmers Weekly's Phil Case at a media briefing this week. Rob went on to say that ports such as the Port of Dover need to be adequately funded and adequately supported when it comes to keeping illegal meat imports out of the country.
Dover Port Health Authority has a very small budget and doesn't inspect a huge amount of vehicles coming in. It's a massive port. But if they're finding 200 tonne, I suggest that's just the tip of a very big iceberg of what is coming in. And we need to put more resource into that and a deterrent to stop this product coming through. And also, not just Dover, there's other ports that have virtually no checks and they're an open door policy. We need to look at those as well. Crushing of cars was a great idea. We just need to get it moving.
Rob Mutimer there, Hugh, from the National Pig Association. A stark warning to the government, got to get these border controls sorted.
Yeah, they have. It is a real potential weak point with all that's going on. What's happening? I suppose a lot of this is being driven by the price of protein, which we know, and just food in general has gone up. And then the last year or so, we've seen a real spike in the price of protein. You've only got to look at the, particularly on the red meat side. And so, yeah, what better way to get it into the country cheaply than just to sling it in bin bags and put it in a Sprinter van and drive through Dover with it, which is just absolutely tantamount to all sorts of horrendousness going on. There are border controls in place for legitimate loads. And I went down to the border control point, which has had some stick because of where it is. I mean, it's 20 miles up the M20 from Dover. When you specifically talk about that bit, which is where most of this sort of stuff comes in. There are other ports, obviously. But most of the stuff that's going to go into Steventon is declared anyway because they're legitimate loads. So ultimately, it's about having bums on seats in the port, either in the Dover side or the French side, to really pick these vans out. October last year, they had about 15 tons. I mean, the figures coming out of Dover at the moment are crazy. Dover are fighting for resource. To be fair to the minister at the NFU conference, Steve Reed stood up and said, yeah, we're taking this seriously, talking to the Home Office, we're possibly coming up with laws that might mean that the vans are seized there and then if they're found with this stuff in it, and then they could be destroyed along with the meat. But as a biosecurity risk, it is a huge risk, huge risk. And with all that's going on in Europe at the moment, particularly with the foot and mouth bits that we've had going on in Hungary and Romania, Austria, it's really worrying. So, yeah, it's got to be taken seriously because, God forbid, something happens and it'd just be awful, terrible, catastrophic.
The government, of course, insisting that it is taking the situation seriously, but Rob Mutimer, the National Pig Association and the NFU insisting that more needs to be done, Louise.
Yeah, so if my understanding is correct, then African swine fever, it could have huge economic and social consequences if it does come here. I mean, it's a highly contagious viral disease of pigs, isn't it? It's not in the UK at the moment, and of course we do need to keep it that way. The other thing which quite surprised me when Rob was talking about it is that it spreads, of course, by direct contact with infected pigs, but also it spreads in meat and meat products, and they can be cooked, frozen, smoked or cured meat, but it can still spread in that way. So, I was really quite surprised by that. We just have to be pleased, I suppose, that it doesn't affect people. And the other thing which I think he did mention, of course, there's no treatment or vaccine, is there? So the only option then is to depopulate if it does get over here. So we need to make sure that we've got all the right controls in place, don't we?
No, absolutely. And the meat thing's really important. As you said, ASF can come in on the meat. The foot and mouth comes in, particularly if it's bone in, because the foot and mouth virus, whilst the acidity of the muscle when the animal dies starts to go down, and that wipes out a lot of foot and mouth virus. But with bone in meat, it survives in the bone marrow. And it'll live for a long time in that lipid in the bone marrow. It's just, we've got to get on our game with regards to this border biosecurity.
And in terms of resourcing these biosecurity controls, the NFU convening an urgent media briefing this week alongside Labour peer and former Food Standards Agency Chairman Lord Rooker, calling for a cross-government biosecurity plan and sufficient investment to counter what it says are the biosecurity risks that the UK faces. We are an island nation, but we do face a growing number of plant and animal disease outbreaks, not least because of climate change. In 1 week in January alone, Hugh, 10 tonnes of illegal meat were removed from the UK food chain. Illegal shipments, a big threat, a big challenge for the Animal and Plant Health Agency, the APHA. And Lord Rooker himself, a former Defra minister, the last time Labour were in government under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown.
Yeah, the numbers are horrific. I mentioned earlier about what they picked up at Dover. So there's resourcing issues here around border force resourcing, and it's not just the Dover run, the short strait, as it's known in the customs trade. It's the Western ports as well, because obviously they're probably less. I don't know whether are they. There's some evidence to suggest that they're more vulnerable, and then it's also thinking about. We're coping or dealing with, the APHA is dealing with blue tongue at the moment. They're dealing with avian influenza at the moment. They are hugely stretched. We're seeing that in terms of some of their response times, in terms of, they're doing the best they can with the resources they have. And let's not forget, we've got a world-class facility at Weybridge, which they are spending some money on doing it up and investing and sorting it out. I mean, I've been around there. It's an amazing place. And it's such a special place in terms of the knowledge and the expertise that is there. But we also are asking the question, is the right resourcing on the ground? God forbid if something did kick off. I'm personally doubtful that APHA, they struggle at times to cope dealing with some of the blue tongue stuff, let alone if something more horrendous and faster occurred. And with climate change and with all of the stuff that we've talked about before, these disease threats are going to grow. They are not going to go away. They are going to become more and more as we see more equatorial, tropical type disease moving further north across Europe. It is going to be more and more. So having that plan in place, having everything resourced, is absolutely essential. And it just comes back to the whole food security resilience piece.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
With the first fungicide sprays of the season being applied to winter wheat crops, T1 and T2 decisions are just around the corner. Univoc can be used at the T1 or T2 timing for reliable protection from yield-robbing septoria and rusts. While the best returns come from using Univoc at T2, growers experiencing high levels of septoria at T1 will benefit from its robust curative and protectant qualities. Its long-lasting protection also acts as an insurance policy should T2 sprays be delayed by bad weather. Find out more about Univoc, which contains Corteva's unique Inatrec active molecule, at corteva.co.uk/Inatrec.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
Now, as you heard at the top of the podcast, Farm Minister Daniel Zeichner was quizzed this week about the government's policies for agriculture. Lots of frustration and anger out there from farmers in recent months following a series of controversial government decisions. They include inheritance tax, the closure of the sustainable farming incentive to new applications, the faster phase-out of direct payments in England, and tax on double cab pickups, to name but a few. So fed up are some farmers that this week they've stopped supplying wheat to flour mills. MPs quizzed Mr Zeichner on the issues during a session of the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Select Committee. Committee Chairman Alistair Carmichael asked Mr Zeichner about farmers withholding wheat.
Minister, it's reported this morning that we're going to see the first farming strike as wheat producers are going to refuse to supply milling quality wheat. This have an implication for the production of flour. How do you feel about being the food minister who took hot cross buns off the table at Easter?
Obviously, I understand the unhappiness that is out there, but equally, I'm very confident that we have resilient supply chains, and I would encourage people to engage in dialogue with us about the future, much as we have done this morning.
Do you think they haven't done?
That we haven't had dialogue. It's always possible to have better dialogue, but Secretary of State and I frequently out talking to farming organisations, and we have good dialogue with them. And whilst I understand the unhappiness,
these farmers are talking about taking a massive hit. Do you think they're just doing this on a whim or to make a political point?
As I say, Chair, I believe we have robust supply chains, and I encourage people to have a reasoned dialogue, very much as we have this morning, about the way forward for the future. But the overwhelming message should be this is a really, really important sector all the way through the food chain and does a magnificent job in feeding the country. We very much appreciate it.
Do you have any plans to meet those who are planning this strike?
I haven't had any communication so far.
That's Farm Minister Daniel Zeichner. Committee Chairman Alistair Carmichael also asked Mr Zeichner why farmers hadn't been given the promised 6 weeks' notice when the sustainable farming incentive was abruptly closed to applications. It was a question which Mr Zeichner passed on to senior civil servant Janet Hughes, who was sitting next to him.
I might actually pass over to one of my colleagues here who's more engaged in the detail of how the scheme is administered.
So why did we not get the 6 weeks notice that was promised on the RP website?
There was a choice to be made about how to ensure the maximum number of applicants could get fair access to the scheme, and the choice that ministers took was to continue allowing people to apply naturally and close it when the funding had been exhausted. It has been closed to new applicants for now, but ministers have been quite clear that we're now working to develop what the next iteration of the offer will look like, and there will be details of that to come in July.
Yeah.
That's Defra Senior Civil Servant Janet Hughes effectively answering a question on behalf of Farm Minister Daniel Zeichner during this week's EFRA Committee evidence session. Lots and lots in that session, Hugh. Louise, let's start with Alistair Carmichael asking Daniel Zeichner whether he wanted to be known as the minister responsible for a shortage of hot cross buns at Easter, Louise.
That's right. He did ask him whether he wanted to be responsible for that. From my perspective, it would be a real shame because I'm very partial to hot cross buns, but there you go. So we have got some farmers not loading their milling wheat at the moment, or not loading it for 2 weeks. And I think the idea there is to have an effect on the flow of flour to mills. Of course, it does also help to keep this whole issue in the spotlight and get some headlines as well. I'm not really an expert on grain movements and how much slack, if you like, there is in the system. I really don't know. But certainly there are farmers who aren't loading lorries at the moment. And it turned out that it wasn't an April Fool after all.
That's the thing, isn't it, Hugh? I mean, as Louise says, there's two things here. There's one, is it going to disrupt the supply chain? But two, it is about keeping this issue in the news, in the mainstream media, keeping its profile as high as possible.
Yeah, no, and do you know what? Hats off to the guys in terms of their media profile. They've had a coverage in where you'd expect. I would say probably on the across the board. They've had coverage in the papers, in the Times, Express. That's been on the telly. So they've sort of put it out there. The Times article talked about what was used, and it's just something like 490 odd million ton 490 million, that'd be a lot of bread. 492,000 I think was the figure, which is annually what is used for milling wheat in the UK, and it then went on to state that there's roughly 49,000 tons that is currently in the system. So I'm not quite. Apparently, there's some AHDB figures. So it would probably say that there's a bit of slack. Well, there's a month and a bit supply there, supposedly in store, is what it was trying to infer, or the HDB figures were trying to infer. So whether it'll have enough of it'll actually start to cause some shortage. We'll just have to wait and see. But in terms of something people are talking about, yeah, I mean, not everyone is, because obviously there's a lot of other stuff going on in the news, but it has had some coverage and it has kept the issue, in the public domain, or helped to keep some of it in the public domain.
Daniel Zeichner, Louise, also asked whether he'd had any dialogue with any of the farmers who've arranged this so-called bread strike.
Yeah, he was asked about that, wasn't he? And I have to say, I did find it quite amusing because I think he said no, he hadn't had any dialogue with them. And actually, two of the organisers of the strike were in the meeting and sitting right behind him. So I'm not quite sure what that tells us, but I did find that actually really very amusing. I think these government ministers need to make sure they're fully up to speed with who the key characters are. And maybe, just maybe, they had a chat afterwards. I don't know. But it was quite funny when you could just see them sitting there behind him.
And understandably, a lot of this EFRA committee session devoted to the closure to new applications of the sustainable farming incentive and why there was no notice of it.
Yeah, he did ask Daniel Zeichner that question, and Daniel Zeichner sidestepped that one. And what he did was he referred the question to Janet Hughes, who's a senior civil servant in Defra. Now, many of us have met Janet. She's been very much, prominent and out and about when she was when they were working on setting up the sustainable farming incentive. And Janet is well liked by farmers. She's highly capable. She's very familiar with the scheme. So she was left to answer that question. But, because she is so capable, she was able to say, well, it was the ministers who made that decision about not having the 6-week notice period. So I think there was a bit of furore about the fact that they thought Janet had been treated very badly. But I have to say, the Janet that I know is quite capable of handling a few questions like that.
Yeah, she batted it back perfectly, didn't she? I mean, he effectively threw her under the bus. And she said, but hang on, no, that's what you wanted to do in a very professional, straight line way. And I absolutely echo what you say, Louise, in terms of, she has put a lot of work into this and she's been out and about for years. And I'd imagine she's been pretty damn frustrated as well, dealing with Defra systems, with the IT, trying to get it out. It's been, Chinese water torture and trying to, as a scheme, and then whoosh, it's all pulled away again. So no, she did a very good job at batting it back to the minister, definitely.
The other thing that stood out for me in this evidence session was Janet Hughes saying that 3,000 farmers had started an SFI application but weren't able to finish or submit it before the door closed. So those 3,000 farmers with partially completed applications now locked out of the SFI. They won't be able to join it, at least for the time being, but a glimmer of hope for farmers who did complete an application but who were unable to submit it because of technical difficulties. An indication from Janet Hughes that those applications will be processed and agreements issued.
And don't forget, Johann, that there are, of course, quite a few farmers who have submitted their applications, but they actually haven't heard yet whether it's it's going to be all systems go.
Yeah, Janet Hughes saying that the Rural Payments Agency is working its way through about 4,000 SFI applications successfully submitted by farmers, and those applications being approved at a rate of about 500 a week, so a wait of up to 8 weeks or so for farmers with applications in the system before they know whether their SFI agreements have been approved. Watch this space.
The reality is, Johann, Janet Hughes in the session said the earliest they're going to be able to say any more about the future of SFIs after the spending review. So it's probably going to be July. And then to actually get stuff, I mean, they may get stuff out done quicker, but the very earliest we'll have an inkling of what the future holds will be then. And let's face it, with all that's going on, economically, and all that's going on with the economy, who knows where we're going to end up and how much money is going to be left in there. It's not, well, it doesn't look a particularly sparkly picture at the moment. Let's put it that way.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
AgriVista's innovation range delivers cutting-edge bioscience products designed to optimize the performance of your crops, underpinning yield, quality and profit. Whether it's improving nutrient uptake and utilization, maximizing chlorophyll production, or reducing plant stress, our solutions are backed by science, field trials and tangible yield-based results. With tailored products for every stage of your crop's development, we help you choose the right options at the right time, making a real impact on your farm. Find out more at agrivista.co.uk/innovation.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
You're listening to the Farmers Weekly Podcast. Welcome along wherever you're listening to us from. You can email us, podcast@fwi.co.uk. And if you're in the UK itself, you can message us by texting the word farm, followed by your message to 88440. Louise, messages this week.
Yes, I have had some messages this week. As usual, it's good to know that people are listening anyway. And they were all on the same topic, actually. And it's concerning the item that we did last week on the National Pesticide Action Plan and the fact that the government is encouraging everybody to take up IPM, integrated pest management. And we spoke last week about that, and we had Mark Ramsden from ADAS on. Well, a few farmers, all arable farmers actually, have contacted me to say that they have been doing IPM forever. As one of them said, since the dawn of time. So it's really nothing new or revolutionary, and they're not sure what else they could be doing. So in other words, they were all saying the same thing. We need some fresh ideas on this. It's a bit like going back to the 1970s.
I said that though, didn't I? And I said that they're pretty much all farm assured because they have to be to sell anything, rightly or wrongly. And to be farm assured, you have to show that you're doing IPM. Even I've been doing it since the dawn of time, Louise, on my small allotment patch of growing things.
Yeah, and it's a good thing to do. And luckily, everybody knows that.
But they're right. It does need some fresh ideas, doesn't it? And some fresh logic.
Absolutely. And now we've got a target that they've got to hit. We've got to hope that that they can do that with what they've got at the moment.
Anyone with the ideas on getting to the 10%? Email now. We'll get you on. Tell us all how to do it.
Yeah, podcast at fwi.co.uk or message us by texting the word farm followed by your message to 88440. The other big news this week, Donald Trump's tariffs, of course. A 10% tariff on all UK products imported into the USA from Saturday, 5th of April. Exporters and importers of agri-food products on both sides of the Atlantic will be trying to do what they can to swallow some of that 10% tariff cost. It won't be possible, though, in all cases, and that 10% tariff cost, that extra cost, will be passed on to American consumers who may decide that imports of UK food and drink into the USA are therefore too expensive and they will buy less of them. Big implications, Hugh, for the UK agri-food sector.
Yeah, it's just the Trump presidency bandwagon rolls on. It's surreal, isn't it? It's like a dream. It's like a cross between an episode of South Park and The Simpsons and something else. And here we are. And yeah, it gets oranger and oranger. Obviously, the big sector, agri-food, that is going to be hit by this will be distilling and whiskey and gin. Do you know 1.2 billion quid's worth went to America in 2024? 244 million pounds worth of fish, with salmon being the most popular declared customs category, and 126 million pounds worth of beer. So actually, because of that huge value on booze, the US is actually the second largest export market for UK agri-food beyond the EU. So it's going to have some impact, isn't it?
Yeah, those figures from the NFU, and the NFU itself saying that it's working at pace with officials from the UK Department of Business and Trade and trying to mitigate the worst impact of those tariffs. Tariffs, though, are very much a blunt tool, Louise, and they have effects in other areas too.
Yes, there can be. I mean, obviously, this is a developing situation at the moment, and the 10%, I think, applies from this Saturday. But you have to remember that Trump has been president once before, and his own farmers actually had a really hard time then, and I think they're going to have a very hard time again. So he had to bail them out last time to the tune of many tens of billions of dollars in aid payments. So, this is all about really adapting to the changing global trade dynamics, while also, I suppose, recognising potential competition, because we know that there's going to be distortion or disruption and some sort of fallout and spillover. You have to remember things like the US maize exports. I think the EU is the second largest destination for them after Ukraine. So, if the EU retaliates in the way that it has been threatening that it will, his own farmers aren't going to have a very good time either. So I guess it's the word that we're going to use is uncertainty, isn't it? And we really don't need that at the moment.
It's hugely uncertain, because if you think about that as well, soy, look at the soya market. Loads of the soy that comes into the EU and UK will be US originated. A lot of it's obviously South American. But the other one to consider for the US farmers is their biggest soy export is China. And China absolutely hoovers up soya. I mean, at the peak of that last Trump presidency, at the very end of it, as he was really getting upset with President Xi and vice versa, they did their biggest ever soya trade by a factor of about 8 behind the scenes. So it is going to be really interesting to see how it pans out. One thing that obviously as a beef farmer I was watching was what was happening in terms of Australia. Australia has been treated the same as the UK with a 10% tariff line. So there was a big fear, or there still could be a fear here, that if the Aussies, because of dear old Boris's amazing trade deal, they have a clean and open destination for the UK, tariff-free for all their agri products. So if it can't go to America because it's being outpriced, there's a chance it gets dumped here. So that's a real concern.
That is a concern. Another concern that this could spark a tit-for-tat trade war. We could end up seeing imports of chlorinated chicken, hormone-treated beef coming into the UK from the USA, Hugh.
There's two things. There's all the uncertainty around the tariffs and the counter impacts it's going to have on other countries and other things and all of that we sort of talked about. But the other thing is, remember, there's this trade deal which UK government seems to be quite keen on putting together. They've already put together a list of 400 potential items that they may retaliate on with their own tariffs, although the Prime Minister's trying to play it cool. But the key thing here is if the trade deal goes through, the potential worry to making concessions on some agricultural products. One article I read in the Times talked about chicken, pork and beef. Now, that's going to reopen the whole chlorinated chicken debate. Trump said this week, there's nothing wrong with our chicken, it's fantastic. So, yeah, just hang on to your hats, because that might come and be even worse than the tariffs if they make concessions there just to keep the White House happy. Who knows? But if they rush it, there's potentially a chance, it could go wrong. But we'll just have to wait and see. Or they may choose to do nothing and just take the 10%. Who knows?
Yeah, tariffs, Trump and trade, very much a developing story in all the global markets. The agri-commodity markets closer to home, though, Hugh, how are they doing?
Well, we'll start with the finished steer deadweight. This week goes up again by about 4p, 681.3. That's up from 676.8 last week, so breaking another record. Finished steer live weight at 3, that jumps up as well from the 383.7 last week. Where will it ever end? To 391.1 this week for the UK steer average live weight price. Onto the sheep rings, SQQ deadweight 727.7. That's actually gone back about 3 pence. The live weight SQQ 339.4. That's also dropped. That's dropped back about 6p on the week. Pig price, very little change, slightly up 0.2 of a penny, 204.6 for the SPP price this week. Arable markets, there ain't much cheer there. Lord knows what they'll be like after the tariff by next week. At the moment, feed wheat is 164.9. That's back about £3 on the week. Milling wheat 183.70. That's back just under £1. Feed barley pretty much stays the same. It's marginally more by about 70p, £153.80. Oilseed rape has gone up. You gained about £12 there, £432.50. Feed peas stand on at 216.70, and feed beans stand on at 217.10. If you are buying diesel at the moment, that's gone up by an absolute smidgen of about 0.21 of a penny. 68.91 is the Wednesday morning price on the Wednesday morning ring round for a litre of tractor diesel.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
And finally, it's been a year, or just over a year, since Graham Wilkinson took up the reins as Chief Executive of the Agriculture and Horticulture Development Board. Recent times have been tough for the AHDB, and hopes were high that Graham could revitalise what was seen by some as an ailing organisation. A strong track record, including time at Tesco and dairy processor Arla, meant Graham chose to hit the ground running, implementing a number of changes. We got him on the line earlier and asked him what his biggest challenge has been at the AHDB and whether he's managed to fix it.
To summarise, the key things that I felt needed fixing was to set a clear direction for the organisation, reflecting that AHDB had been through significant change over recent years, and I believe probably lacked a real sense of direction, what it was there to deliver, what it was there for, ultimately how it was set up to be able to demonstrate a value return to our levy payers. I think leadership as well within the organisation was something that is important to me, and it's something that I've very much focused on in the last year. Value is really key, that we're working on key areas that ultimately do return value to our levy payers and making sure that we're prioritising our work. And I think finally would be around confidence within the team, that they have that confidence and ability in themselves to really step up, because the key thing for me at that point was very much that agriculture in the next 5 years was at a crossroads and was due to go through significant change. What I'd probably underestimated is how quickly that change would actually come. So those were probably the 4 areas for me, Johann, and have I fixed them? I'm never somebody that is fully convinced, and clearly I'm always looking to improve. So I wouldn't say that I've achieved everything, but I'm pleased and I'm confident that we are on the right track as an organisation to be able to deliver that value to our levy payers. I think the final point as well that I noticed very early on in joining AHDB is that they didn't use the proper tea bag. So I actually converted them within a week to Yorkshire tea, and we've never looked back.
I won't ask you what brand of Yorkshire tea, Graham, but Louise, you've also got a question.
Graham, it has been a hell of a year for farming, the year that you've come into, and farming was already changing when you arrived, but this year that pace has really ramped up with quite a few announcements which do affect, every farming sector. Can an organisation that the size and shape of the AHDB be agile enough for that, do you think?
There's no doubt about it, Louise, that it's been one crazy year. The reality is that I think when you look at the amount of work that we do across all our 4 sectors, we're in the region around about 2,000 pieces of work. So the breadth of the work that we do as an organisation is immense. And the reality is that what we're focusing on and what we'll be focusing harder on is being able to prioritise harder, focus on less and deliver it better. And I think that's important to any organisation. And I think by doing that, that's what will help us to be agile as an organisation. It's really, really important that we do that.
Graham, you mentioned that you were taking on the role as farming was coming up to a bit of a crossroads and a lot of change was expected over 5 years. You also said that some of that's happened a lot quicker. What's happened a lot quicker? What's taken you by surprise in terms of how change is progressing?
I suppose it's without a doubt, and it's clearly obvious that change in the policy decisions and how that then impacts farmers on the ground and supply chains. That's probably been, without doubt, the biggest eye-opener for me and the organisation, and how we've actually been able to have to adapt through that speed of change. That's probably been the biggest thing for me, Hugh.
And in terms of the priorities, when you came into the role, one of the big things was there'd obviously been the big review, the sector reviews, and ultimately they came about reputational protection, and that was everything from marketing through to emissions profiling each sector and being able to stand their ground on the environmental impact. Does that pretty much remain the same 1 year on?
Absolutely. It's a core piece of work that we're involved in across all the sectors. There's, I suppose, differential areas within each of those sectors. But ultimately, if you take the marketing work that we do, that was ultimately built upon a landscape where actually there are significant health challenges within the UK. So obesity is a leading cause of disease. It's a cost to the NHS of £6.5 billion annually. 67% of men, 60% of women are overweight. So we do have some very serious health challenges. So the work that we do around our Eat Balanced campaign is absolutely fundamental in being able to demonstrate the importance of a healthy, balanced diet. For the year ahead that we're looking at, in relation to that, we're looking to spend just over around about 10 million of the levy across our red meat and dairy sectors in being able to promote the benefits of a healthy, balanced diet, which is really important in recognising the role that red meat and dairy plays in relation to improving the health. One of the things is also really important to be able to do that is also to have the evidence around the work that we're doing from an environmental perspective and farmers are doing from an environmental perspective as well. And I think that's where the baselining work that we launched earlier on last year, where we've got 171 farmers on that project now, I think it's really a really important piece. I would say it's probably one of our most important pieces of work that we're involved in as AHDB. And we obviously thank the 171 farmers that are involved in that, but our ambition would be that all farmers should be able to understand the baseline, should be understand what mitigation opportunities are available to them on their farm. And I'm absolutely a firm believer that actually when you build in the biodiversity, when you build in sequestration, actually agriculture and farming is far better than some people would like to think, and actually further on the route to net zero than many people would expect. And I think that's what we want to be able to do. We want to bring the evidence and the facts to demonstrate how far actually agriculture and farming is to achieving net zero.
Graham, that's a worthy ambition, but also a costly one. When you look back at the autumn budget, the sort of pressures that has put on all sorts of businesses, all sorts of organisations, things like the increase in employers' national insurance contributions, all of these are costs. Are you affected in your ability to be able to deliver on stuff like that by things like the autumn budget?
Absolutely, but I don't think that we're anywhere any different to any other business. We need to cut our cloth accordingly. We need to look at where we can find and identify efficiencies. Ultimately, I am absolutely focused that we need to deliver value to our levy payers. And so we need to look at where the efficiencies lies, and that's what we're doing. I think how we utilise technology, how we utilise AI, all these kind of things is something that we're looking at, which will ultimately help us to be leaner, meaner, even more efficient, so that ultimately we deliver for our levy payers. We're not doing anything else that any other business wouldn't be doing in the same position.
So, Graham, what sort of relationship do you have with the government, and how involved are you in supplying advice and soundings to them as they make important decisions?
So, as an arm's length body to government, I would say that the arm is very long from Defra and from government. We do supply evidence and facts, and I think we've demonstrated that in some of the work that we've done around TB, the inheritance tax. It's probably one of the areas realistically that I would like to see more of. I think there are opportunities for our information, for our insights and for our data to be used more by government so that the right policy decisions can be made.
But those links do exist, or you're having to establish those?
We do. The links are there. Clearly, Defra and government are going through significant changes themselves, which we respect and we recognise. But I still firmly believe there's a bigger role for a levy-funded organisation such as AHDB to supply and support government with evidence and facts that ultimately help to make better policy decisions.
Graham, you mentioned the inheritance tax work that you did. You worked out that I believe that 75% or so of farms in England would be affected. That was a lot more than the government said itself. Did you get your hand slapped for that?
No, I mean, ultimately, we that's the evidence and the facts that we have at the time. And ultimately, if there's new evidence that comes by, then we'll obviously build that into the work that we do. And that's how we operate as AHDB. And I think that's what we did. That's what we put out. That's what we provided. I didn't get my hand slapped, but we'll continue to do that. We're an independent, evidence-based organisation. Clearly, if there is new evidence to go into that, then we'll build that into our calculations.
That's AHDB Chief Executive Graham Wilkinson. So Hugh, Louise, Graham Wilkinson there saying that progress has been made during his first year at the AHDB, but as might be expected, still lots to do.
Yeah, I mean, it was a big task, wasn't it? And, you're not going to get it all done in the first 12 months, especially considering what's happened in that 12 months in the farming sector. But I would say, he's been visible, and that is much more visible than the leader of the AHDB has been before. So I think that's a good thing. I do think also, though, that some of the challenges that have been thrown at farming in the last 6 months or so, the AHDB does need to respond in a flexible and agile way. And, the work that they're doing and the research that's going on, it does have to reflect on-farm practice. And, my experience is really with the cereals and oilseeds bit of AHDB, not any of the livestock boards. And if you remember rightly, I think back in 2023, we spoke to Tom Clark on the podcast, who's the head of the cereals and oilseeds bit. And he did say, and he used these actual words, the AHDB has had a near-death experience. And he was determined that they were going to do a lot better. So, yeah, things have improved. I think when you come to cereals and oilseeds again, they do have two very big projects, one of which is the recommended list, and the other is what's known in the industry as RB 209, but I think they now call it the fertiliser manual. Those are two big projects which take up a large chunk of their budget. And the one thing that I would just throw back out there, and I know that arable farmers would agree with me, is do those two big things, do they actually reflect what is happening on farm, or are they a bit behind the times?
I mean, that's right, isn't it, Hugh? I mean, Louise raises some good points there. The AHDB has to be relevant. It has to deliver value for money for levy payers, and it also has to be fleet of foot.
Yeah, it does. Look, I think first RB 209. I'm assuming some money comes in from the red meat side as well, because us livestock farmers use it as well, Louise. It's not just the arable people that use it. Perhaps they don't. Perhaps I've just started a whole argument in HTB. My God, we never thought about that, charging the red meat lot for some of it. Anyway, yes, they have. COVID for me was a big test for HDB at the time. You'll remember there was huge fears around particularly around red meat sales and stuff like that. And I remember that HDB suddenly did a very rapid promotion of lamb, I think it was. And actually, it was really successful. And they proved that they are responsible and they don't need to go to the minister to get budgets signed off 19 years in advance of the actual campaign when the ship has then passed and it's irrelevant. I think they have got a lot more reactive on that promo side. And I'll tell you what they are really good at. And it always amazes me when you sit, and I've said this before, when you sit a load of red meat producers like me in front of an HDB presentation, many of them probably less cynical now than they probably were 5 or 10 years ago. But even over that time period, by the end of it, they're going, actually, that's pretty good what they do. And they're particularly good at taking that very limited budget that they have on the promotion side and hitting, getting bums on seats in terms of their targeting. And as on the promotion side, some farmers might get quite stroppy and say, well, I never see any red meat adverts. I never see this. Well, that's because you're not target, mate. You're going to eat beef and you're going to eat lamb because you grow it. So actually, the people that we're appealing to, you would probably never, ever go near the media streams that they're looking at. So I would say they've got better at that. There's a heck of a lot more to do. And I think the next big crunch I can see coming is the one of funds and money and levies. Because, when they did the big review, what was that, 2 years ago, inflation wiped out 30% of the money available to them in literally 2 years or 18 months. And they put the levies up marginally then. And that'll be the next thing, is that they're going to have to think about levies going up to cover some of this work. And some of this work is really important and is actually really good. I think particularly within my sector, in the red meat side, they do a very good job.
And that levy is going to come under increasing pressure, not least, as Graham was saying, because of increases in national insurance contributions. The AHDB facing similar challenges to other businesses. The other thing that struck me was his very staunch defence of the AHDB's independence. He wasn't flinching when it came to inheritance tax and looking at the impact on that. And the AHDB, of course, coming out and saying that 75% of English and Scottish farms would be affected by the government's decision to impose inheritance tax on farming assets worth more than £1 million, and suggesting that he's not afraid to speak truth to power when it comes to an independent analysis of the issues facing farming. I think that could be really, really valuable.
Yes, their independence is really important, and I think he was right to stress that. The other thing that I noted was that he was honest and sort of said he was disappointed with the dialogue that they hadn't been able to achieve with the government. Now, he's obviously not alone in that. Very few people in the farming sector seem to be able to get a good dialogue going with the government at the moment. But that is something that he feels they haven't done well this year, and that's obviously in his sights for next year. So I really wish him success with that, because, you know, we do need these avenues into government, and we do need to get that two-way exchange of information going.
I think them speaking out on things like that is really important. And there was a time when they probably saw themselves far too much. I mean, technically, legally, they are a sub-agency of Defra. They are part of the civil service. And if you get appointed by them or if you deal with them, you have to go through all the same checks you'd go through if you were, being appointed directly by Defra or someone like that. So they've been quite tied up in red tape. And it's been, as I said earlier, it's been one of the flaws in terms of how they operate. But fair play to Graham and for some of the stuff they've said more recently where, they have said the truth and said what the impacts are going to be. And them having that independence is, as you guys have said, is really important, and hopefully it will continue. Whether we'll ever get to the point where you've almost got this completely standalone independent levy and grower funded body where it's just the legal instrument of collecting the levy that is the government bit, and then once it drops into the account, it's a completely standalone, independent, owned by the levy payers body. Who knows if we'll ever get that far? But certainly some of the stuff they've been doing, particularly around inheritance tax, is really valuable, and it's really valuable that it's in the discussion.
Hugh, Louise, thank you. Some good analysis, as always, there from the arable and the livestock points of view. Thank you too to Graham Wilkinson for coming to speak to us here on the Farmers Weekly podcast. And that is about it for this week's episode. Do remember to subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you really like what you hear, please do leave us a 5-star review. We'll be back next week. If you've any thoughts about what we should be covering, any thoughts on what you've heard in this episode, remember, as always, you can email us podcast@fwi.co.uk. And if you're in the UK, you can always message us by texting the word farm, followed by a message to 88440. But for now, until next week, I'm Johann.
I'm Louise Impey.
And I'm Hugh Broom.
Thank you for listening.